The gavel hit the mahogany bench with a satisfying thud, marking the end of another grueling session. Federal Judge Ethan Callaway removed his glasses and exhaled. His days were filled with high-profile cases, legal intricacies, and constitutional debates, but none of it prepared him for the ridiculous war brewing on his doorstep. Ethan lived in an upscale, meticulously maintained suburban neighborhood, one he had chosen for its quiet charm. The well-manicured lawns, tree-lined streets, and colonial-style houses exuded a sense of order, which suited him perfectly. After all, he valued rules, but only when they were fair. That's why his latest HOA notice made his blood boil. A neatly folded letter had been stuffed into his mailbox, the bold letters on the envelope reading, HOA violation notice. With a skeptical frown, he unfolded the paper and read the absurd accusation. Your mailbox does not comply with the approved HOA aesthetic. Failure to remove and replace it within 7 days will result in a fine of $500 per day. Ethan scoffed. His mailbox, a standard black post-mounted design, was identical to at least half the mailboxes on the street. There was nothing ornate about it, no flashing neon lights, no ostentatious decorations. So why was he being targeted? That's when he spotted her, Karen Lancaster, the self-appointed queen of the HOA. She stood across the street, arms crossed over her chest, her meticulously styled bob unmoving in the slight breeze. Dressed in her usual beige cardigan and slacks, she exuded the aura of someone who thrived on control. Ethan took a steady breath, knowing full well that in his courtroom, she wouldn't stand a chance. But here, she played by her own twisted set of rules. As he approached, she offered a saccharine smile. Ah, Judge Callaway, I see you got my letter. We need to maintain a certain standard in this neighborhood, and I'm afraid your mailbox just doesn't fit the community's vision. Ethan folded his arms. Karen, my mailbox is the exact same model as over a dozen others on this street. Care to explain why mine is suddenly an issue? Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes gleamed with unspoken malice. Oh, it's simple. You see, the new HOA guidelines require all mailboxes to be HOA approved. Yours was installed before the new regulations took effect. He raised a brow. And when exactly did these new guidelines take effect? Karen waved a dismissive hand. Just last month. Didn't you read the updated HOA bylaws? Ethan resisted the urge to roll his eyes. I'm very familiar with bylaws, Karen, and I know selective enforcement when I see it. Let me guess, you're the one who drafted this particular regulation. Karen's grin widened. As HOA president, I have a duty to keep this neighborhood in pristine condition. If you refuse to comply, I'll have no choice but to escalate. Ethan's patience thinned. He had spent decades navigating legal battles and constitutional disputes, but never had he dealt with a case as petty as this. Still, he wasn't about to be bullied, especially not by an overzealous HOA president with a power complex. I suggest you familiarize yourself with federal property laws, Ethan said evenly. The mailbox is under the jurisdiction of the United States Postal Service. You and your HOA have no authority over it. Karen's smug expression faltered for just a moment before she recovered. Well then, I suppose we'll just have to take this up with the HOA legal team. Ethan smirked. Oh, I sincerely hope you do. As he walked back toward his house, he had a feeling this was only the beginning. Karen Lancaster had just declared war on the wrong man. HOA's first power move. Ethan Callaway knew how bureaucracies worked. He'd spent years on the bench, witnessing frivolous lawsuits and power-hungry officials push their weight around. But the HOA? They operated with the same arrogance as a rogue agency unchecked by real law. It didn't take long for Karen to make her next move. A thick, cream-colored envelope sat waiting for him in his mailbox the following morning. The HOA legal department insignia was stamped at the top in a gaudy gold foil. Ethan tore it open and scanned the contents. Final notice of violation. Immediate action required. Unapproved mailbox and additional compliance issues. Your failure to adhere to HOA regulations has resulted in the following penalties. $750 fine for mailbox noncompliance. $500 fine for unauthorized exterior modifications. Non-HOA approved landscaping stones in front yard. $250 fine for improper trash bin storage. Bins visible from street on non-collection days. Continued violations will result in additional fines and legal escalation, including a lien on your property if necessary. Ethan let out a slow breath through his nose. They were piling on the nonsense now. He didn't have landscaping stones in his front yard. His trash bins were neatly tucked away. And as for the mailbox? He knew damn well Karen had overstepped her authority. From his window, he spotted her again, standing in her driveway, smugly watching his reaction. She wanted him to come storming over, to yell, to lose his temper. Instead, Ethan grabbed his phone and made a call. Ben, it's Ethan. Yeah, it looks like I need to brush up on HOA law. Feel like helping me make someone's life very difficult. Ben Holloway had been his law school buddy, now a top real estate attorney. If Karen wanted to play legal games, she'd just invited a grandmaster to the board. Ethan made his way to the HOA office, little more than a repurposed garage space at the community clubhouse. Karen sat at her desk, surrounded by neatly stacked binders, a nameplate reading Karen Lancaster, HOA president sitting front and center. She barely looked up. Judge Calloway. Here to pay your fines. He placed the letter on her desk. Here to challenge them. Karen laced her fingers together. You can request an appeal, of course, but the board stands firm on its decision. Ethan tilted his head. You know, Karen, I've read your HOA bylaws, and I couldn't help but notice something interesting. Nowhere does it say the HOA has jurisdiction over federal property. And as for liens, you can't file one without a legal basis. A bogus fine doesn't cut it. Karen's smile faltered just slightly. If you don't like the rules, perhaps this neighborhood isn't for you. Ethan leaned forward. I like rules, Karen. I follow rules. What I don't like are power-hungry officials who abuse them. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Well, I'm afraid the board has already voted on this matter. He smirked. Then I'll see you in court. For the first time, Karen's confidence flickered. But she recovered quickly. Suit yourself, Judge Calloway. But I wouldn't test the HOA's patience. Ethan turned on his heel and left, already dialing Ben again. She just made a big mistake, he muttered. Little did Karen know. He wasn't just fighting this out of principle. He was about to take her entire empire apart, brick by brick. The HOA escalates the conflict. Ethan Calloway wasn't a man who bluffed. When he said he'd see someone in court, he meant it. But before he could even file a formal response, the HOA ramped up their attack in ways that were not just absurd, but illegal. A few days after his confrontation with Karen, Ethan returned home from court to find something strange. A red violation notice was taped to his front door in bold, capital letters. Final warning. Immediate compliance required. Notice of property foreclosure review. Due to repeated noncompliance and failure to remedy community standard violations, the HOA reserves the right to pursue legal recourse, including property lien and potential foreclosure actions. Ethan's blood ran cold. A foreclosure threat? Over a mailbox? No, this wasn't about community standards. This was personal. Karen was trying to intimidate him, to push him into submission the way she had with countless others. And if he had to guess, it had worked before. He grabbed his phone and immediately called Ben. You're not going to believe this, he said, reading the notice aloud. Ben let out a low whistle. That's straight-up fraud. An HOA can't foreclose on a property unless they hold the deed. And even if they did, this is wildly illegal. Ethan rubbed his temple. How much do you want to bet she's done this before? Want me to do some digging? Dig deep. Hanging up, Ethan turned his attention to the HOA itself. Karen wasn't working alone. There was a board of members, all of whom had been in place for years. The community wasn't full of rebellious types. It was mostly retirees, young families, and busy professionals who didn't have time to fight over petty HOA rules. But someone had to. Later that evening, Ethan attended the monthly HOA meeting, his first time showing up. The clubhouse was packed, a mix of board members and a handful of frustrated residents, all of whom looked uneasy. Karen sat at the head of the long table, her ever-present smugness on full display. Oh, Judge Calloway, she said sweetly, feigning surprise. I didn't think you'd be joining us. Ethan gave her a tight smile. I figured it was time I took an interest in how our HOA operates. And based on the foreclosure threat I just received, I imagine others might want to pay attention, too. A few heads turned. Some of the board members shifted in their seats. Karen's smile thinned. As you know, the HOA has strict guidelines, and failure to comply results in appropriate penalties. Ethan took his seat. Strict is one thing. Illegal is another. He pulled out a folder and flipped it open. I did some research. Your bylaws mention fines, but nowhere does it grant the HOA authority to place a lien without homeowner consent. Yet, I found multiple cases of residents being threatened with foreclosure. Murmurs filled the room. Karen's jaw clenched. That information is confidential. Not anymore. Ethan said smoothly, sliding a stack of documents across the table. I also took the liberty of looking up HOA financial records. Curious thing, your violation fines bring in tens of thousands a year. Yet, less than half of that is reported in the official HOA budget. So where's the rest of the money going, Karen? Silence. One of the board members, an older man named Richard, cleared his throat. Karen, is that true? Karen's gaze flickered. This is outrageous. He has no proof. Ethan held up a page. Signed affidavits from 3 former homeowners who were forced to sell their properties after repeated harassment. Oh, and one of them claims they were pressured into donating to the HOA's discretionary fund to have their violations erased. The room exploded into whispers. Karen's face turned red. This meeting is adjourned. Not yet, Ethan said firmly. Because I'm just getting started. The HOA oversteps and the protagonist strikes back. Ethan Callaway had seen corruption before, but never at a level this brazen. Karen had been running the HOA like a personal empire, extorting homeowners, fabricating fines, and now threatening foreclosure on properties she had no legal claim to. But she had just made the biggest mistake of all, picking a fight with a federal judge. Ethan wasn't one for half measures. The morning after the HOA meeting, he filed a formal complaint with the state's housing authority, listing out the HOA's shady financials, illegal fines, and foreclosure threats. Then he made a few calls to a local investigative reporter and a real estate fraud investigator. If Karen wanted a war, she was about to get one hell of a battle. Karen goes too far. That afternoon, Ethan was working in his home office when he heard a loud clang outside. He walked to his window, and his stomach dropped. A tow truck was backing into his driveway, hooking up to his legally parked car. Ethan stormed outside, phone in hand, already dialing the police. What the hell is going on? He barked. A smug-looking tow truck driver shrugged. HOA ordered it. Said it was an unapproved vehicle for the community. Ethan's hands clenched. I have a garage. I park in my driveway. And I know damn well the HOA can't tow a car without proper notice. Before the driver could answer, Karen strutted onto the scene, arms crossed, looking far too pleased with herself. Oh, Judge Callaway, she purred. I believe you were warned about non-compliant property. The board voted to remove vehicles that didn't meet the community's aesthetic standards. Ethan exhaled slowly, keeping his temper in check. Karen, you just authorized an illegal tow on private property. Karen feigned innocence. Oh, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. If you'd simply follow the rules. Ethan cut her off. Here's a rule for you. Trespassing and unauthorized towing are criminal offenses. He turned to the tow driver, who suddenly looked very nervous. Unhook my car. Right now. The man hesitated. Karen huffed. He is required to follow HOA directives. Ethan tilted his head, watching the tow driver carefully. You can either release my car, or you can explain to the responding officers why you're complicit in an illegal seizure. The tow truck driver hesitated, then quickly unhooked the car. Karen's eyes narrowed. You're making a huge mistake. Ethan smiled coldly. No, Karen. You are. Ethan unleashes hell. That night, Ethan sent an official cease and desist letter to the HOA, outlining their violations. He attached the state housing complaint, HOA financial discrepancies, and proof of Karen's illegal foreclosure threats. Then he sent copies to every single homeowner in the neighborhood. The backlash was immediate. By morning, his phone was blowing up with messages from furious residents. People had suspected Karen was shady, but they hadn't realized just how deep the corruption ran. By noon, a group of homeowners had organized a petition to call for an emergency vote to remove the entire HOA board. And that's when Karen snapped. She stormed up to Ethan's porch, red-faced and furious. You think you can just ruin everything? I built this HOA. You have no idea what you're doing. Ethan leaned against his doorframe, completely unfazed. Karen, I've spent my career taking down people far more powerful than you. And every single one of them made the same mistake you just did. Karen sneered. And what mistake is that? Ethan smirked. Underestimating me. Karen spun on her heel and stormed away, but Ethan knew she was about to make one final, desperate move. And when she did, he'd be waiting. Karen's final, desperate move. Ethan Callaway had seen powerful people desperate to hold on to control before. They always followed the same pattern, deny, lash out, and when that didn't work, they got reckless. And Karen Lancaster? She was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Karen crosses the line. Ethan was on a conference call when his phone buzzed with a security alert. Motion detected, front porch camera. He checked the live feed and his jaw tightened. Karen. It was past midnight, and there she was, standing on his porch, fumbling with something near his mailbox. Ethan hit record as Karen pulled a small crowbar from her bag and started tampering with the mailbox post. She wasn't just trying to find him anymore. She was committing a crime. Vandalism. Trespassing. Destruction of federal property. A crime that, in her arrogance, she had no idea was being filmed. Ethan calmly picked up his phone. Yeah, I need officers at my residence. I've got an HOA president committing a federal crime on my security cameras. Right now. The arrest. By the time the patrol cars arrived, Karen was still there, struggling to remove the mailbox. The flashing red and blue lights bathed her in a harsh glow as she looked up, her expression shifting from annoyance to pure horror. The officer stepped out of his car, one hand on his belt. Ma'am, what exactly do you think you're doing? Karen stammered. I was just. Ethan stepped outside, arms crossed. You were just committing a felony. That mailbox is federal property. Removing or damaging it is a federal offense. Karen whirled on him, eyes wild. This is my neighborhood. I have a right to enforce community standards. The officer shook his head. Not like this, you don't. He glanced at Ethan. You want to press charges? Ethan didn't even hesitate. Absolutely. Karen's mouth fell open. You can't do this to me. I run the HOA. You can't. The officer snapped the cuffs onto her wrists. Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. As Karen was led toward the patrol car, she screamed at the top of her lungs. You'll regret this, Calloway. I'll have your house condemned. I'll. The officer shut the door, silencing her rant. Ethan let out a satisfied breath. Karen had just lost everything, and she had no one to blame but herself. But the war wasn't over yet, because now, the entire HOA was about to collapse. HOA crumbles and Karen's downfall. Ethan Calloway had fought corrupt officials, shady corporate lawyers, and high-profile criminals in his career. But watching Karen Lancaster get hauled away in handcuffs? That was satisfying on a whole new level. But he wasn't done yet. The HOA implodes. The morning after Karen's arrest, Ethan walked out onto his porch with a fresh cup of coffee. The neighborhood was buzzing, neighbors whispering, some openly cheering as the news spread. Karen Lancaster, self-appointed queen of the HOA, had been arrested for vandalizing a federal mailbox. And the fallout was immediate. By noon, an emergency HOA board meeting was called. Ethan didn't even have to attend, because the remaining board members were already panicking. The HOA's financial mismanagement? Exposed. Karen's illegal fines and threats? Under investigation. The foreclosure scare tactics? Declared fraudulent by state officials. The neighborhood erupted in outrage. Homeowners who had been too scared to speak up before suddenly found their voices. Petitions were signed. Lawyers were called. And by the end of the week, the HOA board was voted out entirely. The HOA was officially dissolved. Karen faces the music. Karen was released on bail 2 days later, but her reputation was destroyed. Her once iron grip on the neighborhood was gone. Neighbors she had bullied for years now openly mocked her. Someone even stuck a fake violation notice on her front door that read, Notice of noncompliance. Too much entitlement detected. Recommended action, move out. Karen ripped it down in a rage, but the damage was done. She tried one last power move, holding a press conference in front of her house. She blamed Ethan, called the entire thing a witch hunt, and declared that she was the real victim. It backfired spectacularly, because Ethan wasn't the only one with footage. Multiple neighbors had security cameras, and they shared their own recordings of Karen spying on homes, harassing homeowners, and even forging signatures on violation notices. The HOA lawsuit piled up. Karen faced civil suits, criminal charges, and financial ruin. And then, the ultimate humiliation. Karen's last walk of shame. A month later, a moving truck pulled into Karen's driveway. Ethan, along with half the neighborhood, watched as she packed up her things. Karen kept her head down, avoiding eye contact. But as she loaded the last box, a neighbor called out, Need HOA approval for that moving truck, Karen? Laughter rippled through the crowd. Karen slammed her car door shut and sped off without another word. And just like that, she was gone. Ethan took a deep breath, looking around at the relieved faces of his neighbors. The HOA was dead, Karen was disgraced, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood finally belonged to the people again. But Ethan knew. Karen wasn't done suffering yet, because now she had the law coming for her. The HOA faces full legal consequences. Karen Lancaster may have been forced out of the neighborhood, but Ethan Callaway wasn't done yet. He knew people like her never stopped scheming, not until the law made them stop. The legal reckoning begins. 1 week after Karen's disgraceful exit, Ethan met with state investigators regarding the HOA's shady financials. What they uncovered: blatant fraud. Tens of thousands in HOA fees were missing. Karen had been pocketing money from fake fines. Certain board members had received bonuses for enforcing Karen's illegal violations. And now, they were all on the hook. The state slapped the former HOA board with massive fines, and a civil lawsuit was filed on behalf of the homeowners. Karen's nightmare grows. Ethan didn't forget about Karen either. She was still facing criminal charges for vandalism. But now, the financial fraud case added fuel to the fire. The HOA's illegal foreclosure threats brought additional charges. Former homeowners who had lost thousands in bogus fines were now suing her personally. Karen had lawyers scrambling, but even the best defense couldn't save her from the cold, hard facts. And Ethan? He made sure to personally attend every hearing, watching as Karen's power and arrogance crumbled under the weight of actual justice. The final blow. Months later, Ethan received a letter in the mail. Lancaster versus Homeowners Association Legal Proceedings. Dear Judge Callaway, we are pleased to inform you that the lawsuit against Karen Lancaster and the former HOA board has resulted in a favorable judgment for the affected homeowners. Karen Lancaster has been ordered to pay restitution for fraudulent fines and will be barred from serving on any HOA board in the state. Regards, State Legal Affairs Committee. Ethan smirked. Karen had spent years wielding power over others, and now she couldn't even run an HOA bake sale. Her reign was over, and soon, her personal downfall would be complete. Karen's personal downfall. Karen Lancaster had lost everything. Her precious HOA was gone. Her reputation was ruined. Her bank account was bleeding from legal fees and restitution. But karma? It wasn't done with her yet. Karen tries to rebuild, and fails miserably. After the legal judgment, Karen vanished from public view. The once feared HOA tyrant tried to rebuild her life in a nearby town. She applied for new HOA board positions, hoping to regain some control. But every time she did, the news followed her. HOA forums warned entire communities about her scams. Homeowners blacklisted her from any position of power. And then, the final humiliation. Karen's new job, the ultimate irony. Ethan was enjoying a quiet morning at a local cafe when an old neighbor, Richard, slid into the seat across from him, grinning ear to ear. You are not going to believe this, Richard chuckled, sliding his phone across the table. Ethan glanced at the screen and nearly choked on his coffee. It was a photo of Karen, wearing a cheap company polo, standing behind a customer service desk. At a property management company. More specifically, a company that worked under an HOA board. Karma delivers the final punch. Karen had no power, no authority. She was just another employee now. The very type of person she had once looked down on. And the best part, her job description included taking complaints from homeowners about HOAs. Ethan leaned back, smirking. Poetic justice. Richard laughed. She spent years making other people miserable. Now it's her job to listen to complaints all day long. Ethan lifted his coffee cup. I'd say that's a fitting end. And just like that, Karen Lancaster, the once feared HOA tyrant, had been reduced to exactly what she deserved. A glorified customer service rep. Epilogue and final mic drop. The neighborhood felt different now. Without Karen's iron grip, the air was lighter, the people friendlier. For the first time in years, homeowners could plant whatever flowers they wanted, park their cars without fear, and exist without being fined into oblivion. And Ethan? He could finally enjoy his home, the way it was meant to be. A new era for the neighborhood. A few months after Karen's departure, the former HOA building was repurposed into a community center. No ridiculous rules. No power-hungry board. Just neighbors looking out for each other. One afternoon, as Ethan was watering his lawn, Richard walked over with a mischievous grin. I got something for you, he said, holding out a piece of paper. Ethan took it and immediately burst out laughing. It was a mock violation notice, scribbled in black marker. Notice of noncompliance. Your lawn is too immaculate, making the rest of us look bad. Recommended action. Relax and enjoy it, you earned it. Ethan smirked, shaking his head. They really tried. Richard grinned. Hey, some habits die hard. Ethan folded the paper, tucking it into his pocket. He took a deep breath, looking out over his perfectly legal mailbox, his untouched driveway, and his peaceful street. Karen was gone. The HOA was dead. The war was over. And justice had been served. Final mic drop. As Ethan turned to go inside, he paused, just for a moment. With a smirk, he muttered under his breath. Case closed. Fade to black. The end.